This is the Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. For 12 years, Israeli politics and Israel itself has been dominated by one man, Benjamin Netanyahu. But today, his record-setting run as prime minister increasingly looks like it will end perhaps as early as this week, bringing a close to what can arguably be described as the age of Netanyahu. Today, Naftali Bennett, a one-time aide of Netanyahu, finally agreed to bring his Yamina party into the so-called change bloc being set up by Yesh Atid party leader Yair Lapid, enabling it to gain a majority in parliament, the Knesset. Bennett is set to become the next prime minister in the first two-year round of a rotation agreement with Lapid for the premiership. The deal will reportedly be finalized tomorrow and sent for approval to the Knesset, which means it could be sworn in as early as Wednesday. Now, Bennett is set to speak in a few minutes, and Netanyahu will respond after that. We will bring you those speeches live. And with me in the studio is Jeremy Saltan, political advisor for the Yamina Party, Naftali Bennett's Yamina Party, and Michael Kleiner, the former Israeli parliament member for the Likud Party, now president of the Likud Party Supreme Court. Jeremy, how did we get here? How did Naftali Bennett reach this point finally?
We ended up in a situation which I don't really think anyone could have foreseen, where we're literally choosing between Naftali Bennett and the change bloc and another election. There were three different paths to bring us to a right-wing government. One would have been Gideon Sa'ar deciding that he's okay with Benjamin Netanyahu, or even accepting the premiership himself within a rotation deal. Another option would have been Bezalel Smotrich agreeing to sit with the Ra'am party led by Mansour Abbas, with them on the outside of the coalition. A third option was, of course, the famous defectors, the stuff that we've been waiting 4 elections to see. And, of course, none of those three options happened, which put us in a situation where we had to figure out what makes more sense. That after Netanyahu failed 4 times at producing a stable government, that a 5th election will be the answer in which we'll be able to do so? Or perhaps we put an end to this countless instability, election after election, and finally bring Israel to a place where we're able to go ahead and go on with our lives. And that, where it seems, is where we're at right now.
Michael Kleiner, Likud in opposition after 12 years? Whither your party?
First of all, you know, until the old lady will start to sing, nothing is ended, but she's tuning her guitar. She's tuning her guitar.
We have to say that. So let's assume you're correct that nobody can predict what could possibly happen.
I was in the Knesset when Shimon Peres came with the government, told President Herzog, not the one who's going to be elected this week, the previous Herzog, his father, that he has a government. In 1990 it was what's called the stinking maneuver. And then he had the Agudat Israel, and then he found out in the day he was due to present his government that Verdiger signed without an ink, and another one disappeared, and no government.
I've been very careful to say could, reportedly. Let's take that for granted. But let's assume what appears to be happening is going to happen. Is the Likud, what is its strategy going forward if it has to go into opposition?
Look, first, it's new to us because the analysis of my friend Jeremy was 100% correct. The number one person to blame that there is no national government is not Naftali Bennett and not Ayelet Shaked, but Bezalel Smotrich. There was election results that there were 63 members who didn't belong to the bloc, only not Netanyahu, including the Ra'am party, and Smotrich was the one who was disqualifying the Ra'am party, and that's the reason Netanyahu had no government. Then also Gideon Sa'ar, though I must say that Gideon Sa'ar in the last few days gave hints that if Bennett will join Likud, he will follow suit. I didn't check it. I heard it from very...
I can rule that out. I can tell you 100% that Naftali Bennett was willing to do whatever was necessary if Gideon Sa'ar was willing to go ahead and join the government, Gideon Sa'ar is the one that decided to rule it out. I know there was a lot of interpretation in terms of what took him so much time in order to go ahead and rule it out. I do not know the inner process that goes in with the New Hope, but I can tell you that Naftali Bennett was willing to do whatever was possible in order to have a right-wing government, including the option with Gideon Sa'ar, including making concessions to Gideon Sa'ar to allow him to come in. That never came because Gideon Sa'ar made it very clear, publicly as well as privately, that wasn't going to happen.
You said the person to blame is Bezalel Smotrich. Now we're talking about Gideon Sa'ar. The story is Benjamin Netanyahu. Isn't he the one to blame for the failure of your party to continue?
He won the election. It is very undemocratic of parties that were getting right-wing votes to disqualify him and join a government which is dangerous to their ideology.
I'm going to take issue. Maybe it's Jeremy's job, but I'll take issue because those parties, unlike previous elections, and I'll be fair about that, where they were more ambiguous or they changed the votes. In this election, every one of those parties that opposed him said they would oppose him.
Not Yamina.
Okay, but it didn't. But they did. He didn't. But you just heard Jeremy say they would have gone with.
But Gideon Sa'ar didn't get 20 seats. He got only 6 seats, and he was offered to reach his goal to stop Netanyahu's premiership with a delay. And he could tell the public, look, if you would have given me 20 seats, I would have done it immediately. But now Netanyahu was ready to give him the first term as prime minister and to limit his position or possibility to become a prime minister. I believe this would have been an achievement. And now in the 21 days, if we would have reached them...
I do want you to hold that thought. I want to go to the Knesset and Eli Hochenberg. And Eli, political drama of the likes we really haven't seen in over a decade here in Israel.
Well, exactly 2 months ago, it was the night in which Avigdor Lieberman at the very last second told Netanyahu he's not going to join his right-wing government, and by that triggering this endless round of elections. But that might end tonight. Naftali Bennett set to take the podium really any second now and declare, I intend to form a government with Yair Lapid and the rest of the change bloc. But declarations are one thing and sealed deals are another thing. Not everything's so very fragile. First of all, because coalition deals between Naftali Bennett's Yamina party and Yair Lapid are not finalized yet, similarly to agreements, by the way, with the Blue and White party and Gideon Sa'ar's New Hope party. So struggles or hurdles might still be ahead in this respect, even though that going so far as to offering him to be first in a rotation over the prime ministerial seat might mean that other disagreements will be smoothed over. The second issue is the timetable. Even if Naftali Bennett declares tonight that he forms a government with Lapid, and even if Lapid goes as early as tomorrow morning to Israeli President Reuven Rivlin telling him, I have the ability to form a government, the parliament speaker has no less than a week, which is a whole lot of time to actually bring this motion to the parliament's plenum. And parliament speaker is Yariv Levin from Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party, so stalling might be expected there. But the most important thing is all the fingers, all the votes. Let's take a listen to Bennett speaking right now here in the parliament.
For election campaigns, we have been looking longingly at our country sabotaging itself, weakening itself, and losing its ability to function. Government ministers who aren't managing anything, riots, the burning of synagogues in Lod and Acre, the lethal neglect in Mount Meron. Instead of leading, the fallback option is to aim fire outside and to polarize and fan hatred inside the nation in order to cover up the failure. 2,000 years ago, we lost a Jewish state here because of internal fighting. This will not happen again. Not on my watch. The political crisis in Israel is unprecedented at a global level. We could go to 5th elections, 6th elections, 10th elections to dismantle the walls of this state brick by brick until our home falls on us. Or we can stop the madness and take responsibility. Some people would like to tell you that there's a right-wing government around the corner and we're the only ones standing in the way. That's a complete lie. There is no right-wing government. 4 elections and another 2 months have proven to everyone that the option of a right-wing government headed by Netanyahu simply doesn't exist. It's either 5th elections or a unity government. Don't let them tell you stories. There aren't defectors, there are no 2 extra fingers for 61, and there is no government. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you brazenly. Even this morning, there was another final public attempt to form such a government when Gideon Sa'ar would be first in the rotation and Netanyahu would be second. I immediately, as always, gave my approval. The effort failed because nobody believes that the promises will be kept anymore. Look, Mr. Netanyahu isn't trying to form a government anymore. He wants to take the nationalist camp with him, the whole country with it, to his private Masada. In this decisive moment, we must take responsibility. Therefore, I am announcing today that I intend to do everything in my power to form a national unity government together with my friend Yair Lapid, so that with God's help, we can extricate the country and put Israel back on track. Yair and I disagree on several substantive issues, but we agree with our love for the country and our willingness to work for it. Yair showed leadership in this period, and I shall be glad to lead together with him and Gideon Sa'ar and all our other good partners to lead this country. Yes, together. This government will only work if we work together as a team. Not me, but us. We will bring the us back, which has been Israel's secret source since its establishment. All parties are invited to join this government. In order for this government to succeed, we will need all of us in the negotiations and afterwards to show restraint. Nobody will be forced to give up on their ideology, but everyone will have to delay the realization of some of their ideology. Will focus on what can be done instead of fighting all the time about what cannot be done. This is not a government that will be against any sector or any group. It won't abuse anyone. Will be only in favor, an in-favor government. You'll see ministers who care, who just run the country, each in their own domain. They're here to work. I appeal from here to everyone in the nationalist camp and religious Zionist movement. There are people who are trying to scare you that this is a left-wing government. That's a lie. It's another lie. The truth is that this will be a slightly more right-wing government even than the current government. Just look at the list of ministers. You should know that the left is making not easy compromises, accepting me, a former head of the Yesha Council and Greater Israel man, as Prime Minister, and my friend Gideon Sa'ar, a clearly right-wing man, as the Justice Minister. We have not moved from our values. My friends, this isn't a government that will do a disconnection and it won't disengagement and it won't give away territory, but nor will the government be afraid to embark on military operations if needed. The political context will not stop anything. Each side in its government will have equal voting power and each side will have veto power. So friends, chill. Citizens of Israel, I'm calling on those of you who believe in this process, who want to give it a chance. Speak up. Let your voices be heard. Because there is a well-oiled machine in front of us which day and night is pumping out lies, truly lies, in order to sow fear in the hearts of the public. So, dear public, it's time for you to support, to speak up, not to remain a silent majority. Don't say, it's a shame later, speak now. We're starting off. If we manage, we'll do something huge for the state of Israel, and we'll know that we did everything at a difficult moment. This is the most complicated decision that I have ever made in my life, but I am whole with it. I pray to God in Solomon's prayer, may you give your people the ability to seek justice and discern right from wrong. Thank you.
We have just heard Yamina Party leader Naftali Bennett explain why he has decided to form a change government with Yair Lapid that would oust Prime Minister Netanyahu and set in what he called a unity government, in which, according to reports, he will be first in a rotation of Prime Minister for 2 years, followed by Yair Lapid. He called on his own camp, the right-wing national camp, not to believe charges that this is a left-wing government. He called for calm. He told that public to chill and relax, saying this is a government that will not take any major steps in either ideological direction. We'll try to work on a consensus basis. Let's go to our Eli Hochenberg. And Eli, Naftali Bennett trying to basically lay out the government that he'll be at the head of.
Right, and already at this very initial stage, Khaled, alluding to a potential paralysis of this pending coalition when it comes to policy. But indeed, you've mentioned that Bennett calling on the right-wing camp to voice their support in this potential government, because there's going to be a whole lot of pressure in the coming days. As we've been discussing before, Bennett took the podium in the coming days. And again, we've been discussing this potential 7 days time frame in which the vote over this government is going to be brought to the parliament's plenum. During this time frame, we're likely to see pressure on individual members of Naftali Bennett's Yamina Party and also Gideon Saar's New Hope Party being elevated to the fullest, because it is enough for one member of this potential government of the so-called change bloc to not vote with the rest of the bloc for this government to fall. And this is why Yair Lapid, for his part, is working very hard to get the support by abstention of the two Arab parties, the Joint Arab List and the Islamic Arab Ram Party, because again, it is enough for one member to vote against this government or to abstain for this entire notion to fall. And this is the counter campaign we're likely to see from Netanyahu and the rest of his allies in the coming days. Netanyahu, by the way, is set to speak a short time from now to respond to Bennett's claim that there is no other possibility. It's either a change bloc government or a fifth round of elections. Netanyahu is obviously likely to try at least to refute this thesis of Naftali Bennett, if you will. But it is also very hard to imagine what more Netanyahu can offer than he already did earlier in the day, initiating this potential trilateral rotation agreement over the premiership with himself, Naftali Bennett, and Gideon Saar. So what other tricks can be pulled out of the sleeves? I'm not sure. But Naftali Bennett with a very clear intention this evening to do whatever he can to form this government with Lapid.
All right, Eli Hochenberg at the Knesset, thank you for that. Jeremy Saltan still with us of the Yamina Party. Your reaction to hearing your party leader speak, some interesting language choices there, and of course maybe respond to Eli's that we're not at the end, we're just at the beginning of the process of forming this government.
Well, you know, first of all, say that you know, for me, obviously that was a very moving moment. We're approaching this time where we can have the first religious prime minister in Israel's history. You know, the first Jew with a kippah, with the yarmulke on his head. This is also for someone as myself, you know, looking at the possibility of the most right-wing prime minister that Israel has ever had. And, you know, these are things together.
Was a pretty right-wing.
He was a pretty right-wing guy. I give that to Shamir, of course. Definitely my favorite prime minister. But Kleiner, who was around during the 80s, can tell you a few things from his first term as a Knesset member. I'll say a third thing, though, also is, you know, obviously is you know, is an Anglo here, you know, within Israel, seeing the first, you know, child of, you know, American immigrants going and rising potentially to the premiership is also something that's very moving for me. In terms of what Eli said, I think she's right, meaning whatever Netanyahu is going to try to say, he has no alternative government to talk about. What he's going to do is to try and put pressure on the various people within my party and within the right camp, including Gideon Saar's party, to try to go against it. And he's going to explain why it is that another election is not so bad. And again, I look at that situation, I'm saying another election is a very bad thing. Why is it, again, and Naftali said this himself, that we expect that in the fifth election, Netanyahu will be able to do something that he was not able to do in the first 4.
All right. There's plenty for you to respond to, Mike, so I'll just let you respond. I want to reiterate something Naftali Bennett said, strong language. Benjamin Netanyahu is leading the nationalist camp to his own private Masada, a reference to the mass suicide of it. I just want to show that we do have a podium. We are waiting for Benjamin Netanyahu to speak. But your reaction to what Naftali Bennett had to say?
No, first of all, he made what was expected for him to say. I disagree with the definition of this government as a unity government. You cannot say that it's a unity government when you have the biggest party in the right wing, which got more than 85% of the votes of the right, and she is outside in opposition, and say it is a national unity government. It is a government tending to the left, headed by Naftali Bennett. And I give you one example. For example, Michaeli is Minister of Transportation, supposed to be. And if she is Minister of Transportation, you believe that they will build one road in Judea and Samaria? You believe that she will continue to build Okef Chavara, which is a very important road for all Samaria, which Israel Katz started to build? The practical abilities of this government in the ministries will be very harmful to the right. So I believe Naftali Bennett, even if he is right in many of his arguments, the decision he took is bad for the state of Israel and is bad for Naftali Bennett, and unfortunately also for Ayelet Shaked, which will even not become a prime minister and could be the queen of the Likud.
Right. Well, since you raised the cabinet portfolios, let's take a look at the projected cabinet that's going to be set up in this change government. Of course, Naftali Bennett, as we said, will be sitting at the head of it. Yair Lapid, alternate prime minister and foreign minister, switching roles after 2 years. Let's move down. We see Benny Gantz staying on as defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, the finance minister, Gideon Sa'ar, the right-wing member of the head of the New Hope Party, as the justice minister, key ministry, Ayelet Shaked as the interior minister, a very important role, Merav Michaeli, head of the left-wing Labor Party, as the transportation minister. We'll just run some of the other names, but we won't necessarily go through them. It certainly is a mixed bag there. Let me go to our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman, who's joining us. Owen, let's take a look at what's happening this evening. And again, the enormity of it. We always have to stay focused on the enormity of it. The change in government, Benjamin Netanyahu, after a dozen years, no longer, it looks like, will be the prime minister.
That's right, Kalev. And Netanyahu, I think when he set out on this long journey over the course of the last 2 years, thought that he was going to be the one to win the war of attrition, that he was going to be the one to tire out his opponents. And if, in fact, this government gets to the finish line, and again, there's at least a week to go until it does, then Netanyahu will have taken the gamble and lost. He will have actually had his opponents, against the odds, it has to be said, unite against him and themselves win the war of attrition and tire out Netanyahu and his opponents, so to speak, and be able to then take the prime ministership. And a really dramatic turn of events in Israeli politics that I suspect, to use the cliche, none of us would have predicted 6 months or a year ago. You know, Kalev, if this is the fifth act of the Shakespearean drama of the story of Benjamin Netanyahu, then Netanyahu's tragic flaw is this issue of trust. Pay attention to what Naftali Bennett said in the speech. The reason why Netanyahu's proposal this morning to Gideon Sa'ar wouldn't work is that Gideon Sa'ar wouldn't trust him. That in effect, this could have been, as I interpret what Bennett was saying, this would have been Netanyahu's trick to try to run out the clock on Yair Lapid's mandate, to then get the mandate to the Israeli parliament, to then somehow get the recommendation into Netanyahu's hands, and in some sense torpedo the government so that Israel would go back to elections, Netanyahu would stay prime minister, and Gideon Sa'ar's time as prime minister simply never would have materialized. The fact that there's so little trust, even among Netanyahu's potential ideological allies with him and those who worked with him in the past, would have turned out to be his tragic flaw. And then one final note about Naftali Bennett. Jeremy Saltan talked about this, but it has to be emphasized. Bennett's identity as a religious Jew, as an observant Jew, someone who wears a kippah. Jeremy will remember well, we were together at an event that Naftali Bennett held in Beit Shemesh, I think about a year ago, just before the pandemic started, before that round of elections, the third one, we should say. And the biggest applause line by far in the crowd is when Bennett said, in a kind of mock defiance, that he was going to rise to leadership wearing a kippah. Bennett has made it his life's mission and his vision, the idea of integrating religious Jews into the fabric of Israeli life, not, as Bennett said in that speech, as the kashrut supervisor in the kitchen, not in some kind of sectoral job, but at the helm of the national leadership. And he's on the cusp of making that happen, truly part of Israel's history. And of course, Jeremy Saltan also mentioned Bennett being the child of American immigrants, also very, very important milestone for Israel and its society.
Right, on that issue of trust, we do have to point out that of the three people, other than Yair Lapid, who are responsible for bringing down Benjamin Netanyahu, two of them, Bennett and Lieberman, worked. In fact, they were brought into politics, you can argue, by Benjamin Netanyahu. And of course, Gideon Sa'ar worked with him in the Likud and was seen by many as perhaps successor. These are some of the people who are closest to him. Talk about Shakespearean, et tu, Brute. I mean, talk about Shakespearean tragedy. Owen Altman. Thank you.
Many Brutus here.
There are many Brutuses here, and maybe a few Caesars also. But I think we have to give Jeremy a chance to respond to Michael Kleiner's point, saying, yes, Naftali Bennett is right wing. He's religious, as you say, but this government is bringing in figures on the left into positions of power, and that will influence things going forward.
For sure will. Look, let's be honest. This is not going to be a right-wing government, but it's not going to be a left-wing government. It's going to be something that's in the middle. And in terms of functionality, if Merav Michaeli decides that she wants to block things, we know how to block things too. I don't think that's going to be where we go here, because we're going to have Benjamin Netanyahu as opposition leader, and that's going to be great motivation for Merav Michaeli not to go ahead and do a bunch of things that could torpedo this coalition.
He will stay the glue even after he's
I believe
going away.
That Benjamin Netanyahu, and you can quote me here, he will be the glue that keeps the entire government together. And if it actually does last as long as it does, and Lapid is able to go ahead and take over at a certain point, 2+ years from now, then it'll be Benjamin Netanyahu that allowed the coalition to last that long in order for that to happen. But again, in terms of the coalition itself, let's be honest, when you're looking at Gideon Sa'ar as a right-wing justice minister, that's much better than Benny Gantz or Nissenkorn or Tzipi Livni, who once had it.
To appoint justice.
I'm happy to tell you that Likud is going to get a spot there. Yamina is going to have a spot. New Hope is going to have a spot. As you know, you need 7 out of 9. We will have veto power to veto whoever we need in the Supreme Court.
I don't want to.
Don't worry, Michael.
Okay, hold on. I don't want to go too much into those kind of details, but here's I think the key point. A few months ago, I spoke here in the studio with Naftali Bennett about why he was willing to contend against Netanyahu. Let's take a listen.
Israel is not managed. There's no competent management of this country. If it were a company, the CEO would be fired. And it's time to fire the CEO and bring in a new CEO, a new leader. Say thank you to Netanyahu, which I do appreciate his contribution. He's not going to be able to unite the country. He's not going to be able, he doesn't have the ability these days to reinvigorate Israel. And that's what we need. So that's what we're going to do.
I want to go about that point Naftali made, because there was a moment, and it was 5-6 years ago, when it looked like Benjamin Netanyahu, instead of trying to have some kind of either unity government or broader government, said, I'm going to go strictly along on the right and go all in on this, and that served him for a period of time. But it looks like in the end that is what kind of defeated him, that maybe people felt he was just a bit of a divisive figure at this stage.
Look, the last coalition, which was a sort of a unity government with Benny Gantz, wasn't such a good experience of how you run a country with two heads in the leadership.
But Benjamin Netanyahu had something to do with that.
But everybody today, Benjamin Netanyahu serves as a scapegoat. Everything that runs wrong in the country is Benjamin Netanyahu. On the contrary, on the other hand, for example, the vaccines are the Kupot Cholim, the insurance, medical insurance companies.
But Netanyahu
is as prime minister. It's natural, but it's exaggerated in his case. The media is making a smear campaign against him. That's why when Bennett said, now there will be propaganda against you, on the contrary, the propaganda of all the media, of Al Jazeera 12, Al Jazeera 13, and Al Jazeera 11.
I'm going to explain to our viewers, these are the Israeli television channels, not literally.
Yeah, but called, which are equivalent to Al Jazeera. They will will compliment Bennett and will embrace him. He must be careful not to drown in a base of sugar.
I want to go, well, I'm not sure that everyone would necessarily agree.
Because he may drown in this sugar that they will send over him.
Many people, Owen said, did not think this would happen. Let's go listen to Prime Minister Netanyahu now. Like he's about to speak. Speaking after Naftali Bennett gave his address, of course.
Citizens of Israel, I am standing here tonight as a faithful servant of the public, elected by nearly 2 million people. Over 1 million voters voted for the Likud, headed by me, and another 1 million voters who wanted me as the Prime Minister of a right-wing government. They did so because of my loyalty to the land of Israel, to the state of Israel, to the security of Israel, to the future of Israel. They know well that my conscience, this conscience, hasn't been disrupted. I heard Naftali Bennett. Unfortunately, he once again is leading the public astray. The same lies, the same empty slogans about hatred and division. When the one who is, from the person who is lending a hand to that hatred, and I have to say also the person who is committing the fraud of the century. The day before the election, Bennett signed a letter on live TV. You all saw it. And he said, I will not allow Yair Lapid to be Prime Minister, not even in a rotation agreement. And during the election, he said, I shall not make Yair Lapid Prime Minister, not in a rotation, and not in anything else, because I am a right-winger, and this is against my values. And for me, my values bear weight. Naftali, your values don't even weigh as much as a feather. There isn't a single person in Israel who would vote for you if he knew what you're about to do, maybe apart from you. So immediately after the elections, Bennett made his first flip-flop and retreated from all of his promises. He started charging towards a left-wing government in order to be a prime minister at any price. By the way, that's the only thing he cares about. Everything else is just rolling his eyes. During the fighting in Gaza, Bennett did another flip-flop. He declared that the left-wing government had fallen off the agenda. But a week later, the operation was over, and he once again did another flip-flop, a third flip-flop. And he's once again charging towards a left-wing government. Now he explains that this is in order to prevent fifth elections. But what's changed from a week ago? Because during the fighting, when Bennett took the left-wing government off the agenda, was there no threat of elections back then? To the extent that even exists, it doesn't exist. Not seriously, I'll show you. It existed then exactly to the same extent. So what has changed? The answer? Nothing. Nothing has changed. Now it turns out that what Bennett said during the election campaign and during the fighting, these were empty words. Empty words intended to defraud right-wing voters and take right-wing votes and transfer them to the left. I'm telling you the truth tonight. Instead of forming a dangerous left-wing government, immediately when Lapid's mandate ends, we can form a good right-wing government for the state of Israel. There are two ways to do this. The first way, it's unconventional, It's far-reaching. It's the proposal that my right-wing colleagues and I have proposed today. Gideon Sa'ar will be Prime Minister first, I will serve after him, and Naftali Bennett will serve after me. The heads of the right-wing factions and I agreed to this, and I want to emphasize, even though we think that this is very not accepted, very unconventional, and truth really quite twisted, because to give the premiership to someone who heads a party of 6 seats, that's twisted. But we saw the good of the country in front of us, and we knew that the possibility of a left-wing government is even worse. So instead of accepting the amazing, generous offer of ours, Naftali Bennett and Gideon Sa'ar are continuing to charge towards a left-wing government. And therefore, there's another possibility to form a right-wing government. We're talking with members of Knesset who can top us up to 61 in a right-wing government. I can tell you more than 61. They tell us if Naftali Bennett joins you, we'll join you as well. Immediately as soon as Lapid's mandate ends. They add, they say, now we declare that we're against it. But when Lapid's mandate ends and a left-wing government isn't formed, we're in that right-wing government. And so it's obvious that a left-wing government isn't formed. There will definitely be a right-wing government, and there will not be elections. Naftali Bennett says there mustn't be elections. By the way, he says this not because he cares about our country, about the right, about his own voters, all these statements. He doesn't care about any of these. He doesn't want elections because he knows that in these elections he'll just be erased. He won't even reach the electoral threshold. He will violate all of his agreements. I promise that if he has 20 seats in the polls, he would go to elections because he cares only about himself, because he wants to be Prime Minister for 2 years, and 1 year isn't enough. I call on everyone who has voted with right-wing votes. I call on all those with a conscience and all those who have a path. Follow this path. Do not form a left-wing government. Such a government is a danger for the security of Israel, and it's a danger for the future of our country. If, God forbid, it should be formed, if it is formed, in a few days, at the meeting of the Security Cabinet together, Yair Lapid will sit with Nitzan Horowitz and Merav Michaeli and Tamar Zandberg. Now think about that. What will that do to Israeli deterrence? How will we look to our enemies? What will they say in Iran? What will they say in Gaza? What will they do in Iran and in Gaza? What will they say in the hallways of power in Washington? Lapid and Tamar Zandberg and all the others? They will stand up against Iran because they wholeheartedly support the dangerous nuclear agreement. They'll fight Hamas. I mean, they're dependent on the votes of Tibi and Uda. They will defend our soldiers against prosecution at The Hague. I mean, Nitzan Horowitz said that they can be investigated. And Merav Michaeli even called for parents not to send their children to the army. Who will protect the settlements? Not to mention who will pave roads in Judea and Samaria with Transport Minister Merav Michaeli. That's a joke. And here is another fraud that's so absurd. They are calling for this left-wing government a unity government. You understand? A unity government. This is a government with 40 seats on the left and hard left, with some kind of small fig leaf of parties that took votes from the right and transferred it to the left. A government that depends on anti-Zionist votes, and that's what they call a unity government. What unity government? When they take 52 seats of real right-wing, and they call that government? Of what? 2 million citizens who voted for the Likud? Voted for me as Prime Minister? Parties that wanted a right-wing government? They're a disease that has to be cured? What hatred? What condescension! They call this democracy. I tell you, They're so democratic that they even want to pass personal laws against me for fear that I'll beat them in the next elections. We've now seen democracy in Syria. Assad left 2 candidates against him and one with 95% of the vote. By the way, the exact same thing is happening in Iran. A democracy of Iranian, Syrian and North Korean laws, not unity, not healing, not democracy. This is a government of surrender, of fraud. Therefore, such a government must not be formed, and I call from here for all members of Knesset who were elected on right-wing votes, do not defraud the public who voted for you, and no less importantly, do not defraud yourselves. If you're a right-winger, you don't vote for a left-wing government, and if you vote for a left-wing government, you're not a right-winger. This is the simple truth. Follow it. Stand up against the left-wing government, and with God's help, together we shall form a right-wing government for the good of all citizens of Israel. Thank you very much.
Well, we have just heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu deliver what could only be called a blistering response to the speech we heard earlier by Naftali Bennett. Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu facing the prospect of losing the premiership for the first time in 12 years, perhaps as early as this week. Jeremy Saltan of the Yamina Party, first, your response to that speech?
You know, Benjamin Netanyahu has been a great prime minister, and he's done great things for Israel. It's very hard for me to see him in that speech where he's just making things up. You know, he started by talking about, you know, how there's no hatred. Naftali Bennett now has more security than the Prime Minister of Israel does because of what's going on right now in the social. I was with him today. I am not underestimating the amount of people that were there, the amount of the police that were in the streets to go ahead and secure a faction meeting, you know, in Renana. Okay, I'm telling you though, this is not a natural thing where you need to have a whole platoon of policemen and a whole Secret Service unit in order to secure a meeting of politicians to discuss the issues of the day.
Securing Bennett.
You know, I can tell you it was not an easy thing where you need to sneak people in through you know, secret passageways, through elevators and, you know, storageways.
Okay, we suffer from it 12 years.
I'm just telling you that it's a little bit over the top what we're seeing, and you know, I'll remind you, Bennett is not prime minister.
You wanted your leader prime minister, pay the price.
It's fine to pay the price, but I'm saying, you know, when he's talking about how there's no hatred. When you see what's going around in the social media and what you see is going around outside of the MKs of Yamina, you know, their houses and the various events that we're seeing where we can't even have a normal faction meeting, you know, without loudspeakers and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I'll say there is a little bit hate. It's a little bit, you know, disingenuous to say that there is none. He went on and he talked about various things, how Tamar Zandberg's going to be in the security cabinet. You don't have to worry, she won't be. He talked about 40-something, 40-something, you know, MKs. But, you know, Michael, when he's saying 40-something MKs are left, hard left, and he's putting Avigdor Lieberman and Gideon Sa'ar, he can say, you know, they're against me, and they are. No, not but to say that he's saying...
No, the 40 meant
you know,
Lapid, Gantz, and...
That doesn't come up to over 40. The math... Okay, I'm saying if you take the 17 plus the 7 plus the 6, you don't get to over 40. Gantz is not crazy left. No, but I'm saying, look, we're in a situation here where I'm just listening to that speech, and he's talking about how there is a possibility for a right-wing government. Bennett said today, he said okay to the same deal that Netanyahu offered. What is going to magically change, as he said, that Gideon Sa'ar is suddenly going to agree, instead of being justice minister, to then suddenly become prime minister, you know, under the Netanyahu agreement in a few days from now? As Owen said beforehand, this is a situation to try to run out the clock and prevent the opportunity to form a government.
Let's since you mentioned Owen, let's go to our own senior correspondent, Owen Walterman at Petlik Tikva. Owen, your takeaways from that address by Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Kalev, a cross between a politician who actually wants to stop the government from being formed and the first speech of a leader of the opposition. And Netanyahu obviously has rhetorical talents, and he'll bring those talents to the leader of the opposition should that happen. Look, as Jeremy Saltan mentioned, there were a couple things in that speech you could point to that were not exactly truthful. But the overall argument of the speech was an argument that Netanyahu certainly can bring to his voters. And I thought the most effective line of that speech, Kalev, from the perspective of Netanyahu, from the perspective of his base, was the line where he said, what are they saying about us? That we're 2 million voters and we're a disease that needs to be healed? What arrogance. And that is such an effective line because that is exactly the way Netanyahu's base has historically felt vis-a-vis the left-wing establishment in the country. And I thought that that line is an effective line that Netanyahu can take to his base, that he can use to pressure these potential defectors. Not that the odds are necessarily strong in favor of that happening. But again, it is a new day. We're in a new chapter of this drama. There's still at least a week to go until this government is sworn in. And there may be new levers for Netanyahu to use to try to pressure people. And again, a line like that, an emotive line like that, can really energize Netanyahu's base. I thought can be a really effective argument for him. So again, an overall argument that, again, is in keeping with what Netanyahu has said, that the balance of power in this government, simply by the sheer weight of numbers, is going to be in the center-left bloc and not in the right-wing bloc, even if there are allowances made in terms of the ministerial appointments and the voting arrangements to try to correct that. Just as in the current government, Kalev, even though it has all of those arrangements in place, the balance of power at the end of the day is on the right and not in the center-left, and it'll be the opposite in this potential government. So, well, again, a lot of arguments that Netanyahu really can take to his base. Again, there was real fighting spirit in what he did, in keeping with Netanyahu's ability to be leader of the opposition. And don't forget, Kalev, way back when in the 1990s, Netanyahu did a pretty good job as leader of the opposition. Of course, very controversial in terms of many of the things he said, still stoking controversy to this day. Again, many of those who say that he was indirectly responsible even for the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, but very, very effective in laying down the groundwork for then becoming prime minister and bringing the right back to power.
All right, Owen Altman, thank you for that. Well, Michael, I thought that was a balanced view of Netanyahu's speech, but I want to ask you, the prime minister compared what's going on in Israeli politics now to elections, or if you call them elections, in Syria and Iran. Is that a valid comparison?
He had some better arguments than these arguments, but in such a day you can forgive him to being swept a little bit at the end. Okay. But as Mr. Alterman said, the basis of his argument is a very valid argument. The majority of the right is unhappy with the day.
I should say, he said effective argument.
Okay, no, because you see, I understand Jeremy that he's very happy, and I'm with him, by the way, that there will be a religious kippah wearing Prime Minister of Israel. The tragedy is the big majority of the kippah, that people who wear kippah in Israel are very unhappy that such a government will be formed. So this is the tragedy.
I don't think you can say that for sure, that a majority is against it.
I believe so. But you know, of the right are unhappy with this government, and they feel it in the synagogue. That's why the people of Yamina are so much afraid of the Shabbat, because in the Shabbat everybody has to face as religious voters. That's why a guy like Nir Orbach, that was invented by Bennett, and he's a good friend of him, said, I will support you, but I cannot support this government. I'm going to resign because this is the only way to face his public opinion in the synagogue.
Are you facing that in your synagogue, Jeremy?
I'm getting aliyot in my synagogue. No, I'm telling you, seriously, I'm getting aliyot in my synagogue.
Because you're an important person for yourself.
You know, I'm also involved in municipal politics, so I guess that's maybe not a fair comparison, since I might have done a favor or two to the different people in the congregation. But what I can tell you is it's true. Within my family and within my friends, there are people who are not happy with what they're seeing. And for sure, this is a discussion that's going on right now within the religious community. But to say that there's a majority against Bennett, I'm not ready to say that. There is a dispute there. There is an argument, and you can't deny that.
I want to bring up a point. We mentioned the groundbreaking aspect that Naftali Bennett will be the first, if you want to say, Orthodox or Torah-observant Jew to become the Prime Minister of Israel. Let's not forget there's another groundbreaking event taking place here in Israeli politics. And it has to be said, Benjamin Netanyahu has as much credit or blame for this as Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett, which is that for the first time a party will be formed with the full support of, but not a member of, an Israeli Arab party, Mansour Abbas's Ram party, which has agreed to support it from outside, and it would be crucial. Now, this is surely a new line that has been crossed in Israeli politics. But I repeat that Benjamin Netanyahu is as responsible for this. If you disagree, you could tell me, Michael, as Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett.
I believe it is a positive event. I believe it's, from the national point of view, very positive. That's why I criticize Bezalel Smotrich. I believe the change Ram did is a huge change. I believe Mansour Abbas has proven himself as a loyal citizen of Israel. He knows what points you can raise, what points you shouldn't raise. For example, he didn't demand, when he was negotiating with Likud, and I believe the same will be here, to change the Chok HaLeom, the nation-state law. Maybe Horowitz, or maybe Zamberg, or maybe Michaeli will want to change it.
They won't be able to.
Not Mansour Abbas. So I believe I wanted Mansour Abbas in Netanyahu government. Mansour Abbas wanted to be in Netanyahu government, but some journalists asked me, you know that Mansour Abbas, that you are so happy about him, is going to join Lapid. So I said, so what? Lapid is not a Jew?
Are you as comfortable? Is Naftali Bennett as comfortable as...
Look, Michael was there way before, I was. We had conversations around this very table with you, Kalev. And I'll tell you, for me, it's definitely out of all the pills that one needs to swallow. And we have to be honest and say there are some pills we need to swallow in this government. For me, personally, this is definitely the largest of them. But, it makes it a lot easier when, my good friend Michael, who I've known for, about 20 years, when he says that he feels this is something that's a good development for the state of Israel. And again, as someone who, like I said, goes back as a Knesset member to the early 80s, I respect my elders, and I'll take a thing or two.
And I didn't
keep it open. Views. That is a very true thing. That's very rare in Israeli politics to have the long-standing power that you do and still have the same views. So I'm saying I'm willing to have an open mind when it comes to this issue. And it's certainly not something that if you would have asked me, and you did, even 2 months ago, that I would even think is borderline acceptable.
All right.
It's a pity he's not a minister. I think Mansour Abbas should have been a minister.
I'm not. Well, okay. Who knows that may yet happen in Israeli politics, maybe in a Likud-like government, Michael. But since you brought up Bezalel Smotrich a couple of times, why don't we see how he reacted just this evening to the speech of Naftali Bennett? Quote, Bennett's ability to lie in front of the cameras without blinking is simply amazing. For a month and a half, he has consciously sabotaged and acted against the efforts to form a right-wing government, and then claims that it is impossible to form one and defects to the left with terror supporters. Everything was coordinated and planned in advance. A show. The biggest scam in the history of Israeli politics. All the rest are false slogans and cliches. And gentlemen, and maybe even Michael, you want to weigh in, surely the strangest turn of this whole political drama or melodrama is that Benjamin Netanyahu consciously supported the formation of the Religious Zionism Party with Bezalel Smotrich as a head, as not to lose right-wing voters, to siphon away votes from Naftali Bennett. And ultimately, this is what has led to what looks now to be his downfall.
I believe that, even if the gist of and some things that Bezalel says are correct, the culprit number one and the man most guilty for not having a national government headed by Netanyahu is Bezalel Smotrich. I believe he did it intentionally. I believe Bezalel Smotrich preferred to be in opposition. He hopes that Bennett will end his political career in this maneuver he did as Prime Minister of the left, and then Bezalel Smotrich will succeed him as a real leader of the religious camp.
Strange, though, that Netanyahu never publicly calls on Bezalel Smotrich to change his position. He always directs it against Naftali Bennett.
I don't agree with him. I totally disagree with Benjamin Netanyahu. Smotrich owes all his political existence to Netanyahu. He owes his being a member of the Knesset to Netanyahu, who gave him members of Knesset, who gave him votes, who made the marriage with Ben-Gvir, without which Bezalel Smotrich would have had no chance to be in the Knesset, and he's a real Brutus.
Okay, well,
he's a Brutus.
He's the Brutus. You may not. That may be an issue that you agree on, but I just want to go to Eli Hochenberg. Eli, give us your takeaways from that speech by Benjamin Netanyahu, and where this evening leaves us now.
Well, Kalev, the latest update is that the Yesh Atid party of Yair Lapid is announcing that negotiations between the Yesh Atid party and Naftali Bennett's Yamina party will be renewed as early as this evening. All of this in a bid for Yair Lapid himself to get to the president's residence as early as possible and announce, I have the ability to form a government. And then the real battle will begin, something both Bennett and Netanyahu discussed in their statements, the pressure on right-wing lawmakers, let it be from the Yamina party or the New Hope party of Gideon Sa'ar, not to support the formation of the so-called change government. We're already hearing all the leaders of the right side of the political divide, the two ultra-Orthodox parties, Shas and United Torah Judaism, Betzalel Smotrich, of course, of their religious Zionism, all of them urging right-wing lawmakers not to participate in this government and by that foil its formation. So again, declarations have been made, but it is far from final. Still a lot of things up in the air, and still an opportunity or a possibility rather for this coalition not to be formed, despite Naftali Bennett's clear-cut declaration this evening that he intends to form a government with Yair Lapid.
All right, Eli Hochberg there in the Knesset. Very briefly, Jeremy, you've already had one defector from Yamina. Is that party going to hold firm going into this so-called unity government?
Yes, I was at the faction meeting today, and for sure.
Michael Kleiner, again, Benjamin Netanyahu, will he continue as leader of the opposition?
I hope Ayelet Shaked will show leadership and convince Naftali Bennett to reconsider.
But other than that, will Benjamin Netanyahu, if she doesn't, continue as leader of the Likud in opposition?
He was elected. It is his choice.
You could be primaries. There are some people calling primaries.
No. He can call primaries. He was elected for the whole term of the 24th Knesset. Primaries will be who will be the candidate in the next election, which are now due to 2025.
Okay, Michael Kleiner of the Likud, Jeremy Saltan of the Yamina Party, thank you for joining us. I'm just recapping today's events. Naftali Bennett agrees to form a new government with Yair Lapid, thus ousting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from power after 12 years. It's not done yet, but that is where it is heading, and Benjamin Netanyahu facing the political battle of his life in the next couple of days. Perhaps heading now finally to opposition after 4 straight elections.
That
concludes the first hour. Stay with us. We'll have lots more in the second hour of the special edition of The Rundown.